Hello again. Today we are looking at that candidate's answer to a question on the second specimen paper of the English literature paper, Modern Text and Poetry. We're looking at section A, which is worth 30 marks, approximately a third of the marks of the exam. It's a 2 hour and 15-minute paper, and therefore you have about 45 minutes to write your answer. And your text will be one of these. The one that this answer focuses on is an inspector calls. So we're going to jump down and look at the two questions available. Here they are. How does Priestley present some of the differences between the older and younger generation in an inspector calls? And what do you think is the importance of the ending of an inspector calls? You should remember from my last video, but just in case you didn't watch it, I'll remind you or tell you, always look at the second question. That's the one that's aimed at higher ability students and higher challenge. And because the challenge is higher, it leads you towards higher marks. The way that it does that is it asks you to focus on the writer's ideas. And once you start writing about the writer's ideas, it forces your writing to be conceptualized and to have a viewpoint. Being conceptualized forces the examiner to put you in the top band. So writing about the author's ideas forces you to get into the top band. The solution, therefore, to getting into the top band is to choose that second question, because it always guides you that way. Right, we're going to look at a model answer done under exam conditions by a student, but they chose this question, and I showed you in my last video why it didn't get full marks, and that was because it didn't deal sufficiently with the writer's ideas. But let's, in this video, look at what it does do so that you too can get at least 27 out of 30. Okay, here it is. The candidate has started with a very quick plan. They haven't lost any time by doing this, which is good, but their plan isn't focused on getting full marks. You will notice there isn't anything about the writer's ideas here, except perhaps this idea that Daisy is exploited. But the planning's let this candidate down. In your plan, you've got to have the author's viewpoint in this part, because it's the viewpoint which gives you the author's ideas, and then from the author's ideas you get why the characters are constructed the way they are. Let's have a look at the answer. Priestley explores the idea of a generation gap and the problems that may come with it in An Inspector Calls. There seems to be misunderstanding and conflict between the two generations presented in the play, as well as how the younger characters are easily moulded through either exploitation or education, being both more easily controlled and influenced. Well, this is a conceptualized response because it's talked about Priestley's ideas, but it's actually a very poor beginning. They've made up molded and education. These aren't quotations from the play. They've got round that, luckily, or actually skillfully, by putting them in single quotation marks. That means they're not quoting from the text. If we come down here, you can see that when they are quoting from the text, this candidate is using proper quotation marks. But you're very likely to go wrong. So if it's not a quotation, I would advise you not to put marks around the word unless you're very confident, like this candidate is, where they can distinguish between quotations and ideas. Okay, so in the single quotation marks here are the ideas that are being expressed. What's missing here is there's no sense of context, and it's easy just to whap in the context where it's relevant to the author's purpose. And so here the author's purpose is not just to entertain, but it's a political play aimed at an audience in 1945 who were just about to vote in a Labour government in the biggest landslide there's ever been in this country. It's very important that you think of this as a a political text that's there to promote the ideas of socialism as well as to entertain in the theatre. So there's a missed opportunity here to write fully about the ideas of the author, J.B. Priestley. Right, they are very good at writing about method and character, though, as you'd expect. If you're writing about a play, you're always going to be writing about characters. But let's see how they then write about the method. Sheila is a clear example of how the younger generation is presented by Priestley as more open-minded and willing to learn. So they're touching on Sheila not being just a character, but she's an example of all the younger generation, and that therefore is a method. She's being used symbolically. She fully acknowledges that she did something wrong and that her actions have consequences. I behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. She is also more open to listening to other opinions than one she's been fed by her elders, as even though her parents both seem to almost completely dismiss the inspector's opinions by the end of the play, Sheila has gone from being completely ignorant to learning a lesson, forming her own opinions on things like class and responsibility. Now, there's no colour around this, and this is a weak part of the answer because it doesn't have any new reference in it, and also it's not specific. For example, rather than saying she has learned a lesson, be specific about what that lesson is. So one lesson she's learned is that we all our actions have consequences, and therefore we are responsible for what we do, including the unforeseen consequences, such as Eva Smith's suicide. She's got ideas about class and responsibility. Good, but be specific. What are those ideas? Okay, as a member of the ruling class, her responsibility is to look after the welfare of the working class, such as Eva. So then it's specific. Hopefully you can see the difference. She even goes so far as to confront her parents on these things. And this is where she now starts to score marks. This is especially for Prim Everdeen, by the way, who correctly said I kept calling the writer male. So this one's going to be female all the way through this video. So she does this well here, immediately putting the apt reference in. You began to learn something and now you've stopped. It frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it. Which she would not have thought of doing at the beginning of the play. This further shows how impressionable the younger generation are presented by Priestley. So that's not badly made. She didn't need a quotation that was that long. She could have just ended it here at stopped to prove the point that she's just made, as well as Sheila being taught the idea of questioning authority of her older figures, not believing everything her parents tell her. So slightly clumsy phrasing, but not too bad. There's nothing here to say that she doesn't believe what her parents are telling her. So the point is not a well-made one, and that's basically because they're writing so quickly under exam conditions. But the marks come from putting the right quotation in. Let's get to this bit. Sheila also refers to Eva as a person, unlike her father, but these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. This shows how she's more compassionate. That's good. That should be highlighted again, really, as an apt quotation, shouldn't it? Daisy is also shown as part of Priestley's views on the younger generation and how they act and are treated in society, but in an entirely different way. In the time period of the play, is set, Daisy is essentially a straw man. I think that means, in other words, a symbol. A symbol would have been better. Anyway, a straw man of one of the most unfortunate situations you could be in. A poor, unemployed young woman turned to the sex worker industry as a last resort. And the entire reason why she's in this position is because of the actions taken by a mostly older, wealthier, upper-class family. So that's a clear presentation of what Priestley's method is in using the difference between the generations and showing that it's the older generation who have caused this hardship to Daisy. Daisy is meant to be an illustration of the mass amounts of poor young people who are stripped of any opportunity before they have a chance to get ahead. And so that again is Priestley's method. It's a wordy way of doing it. It doesn't use the key vocabulary of socialism or capitalism or social responsibility, little keywords that the examiner is going to be looking for, because they are quicker ways to get to Priestley's views. Right. They have a chance to get ahead, contrary to the Burling's capitalist views, which usually argue that anyone has the chance to get to the top of the ladder. This is very informal language and automatically prejudices the examiner against you. You need to be as formal as possible. But how can that happen if their chances are taken away from them so young? Well, there's no specific examples from the text here, and so the examiner is just ignoring it. It's not scoring any marks. Daisy is portrayed as extremely vulnerable, and this and she's an eye-opener to Sheila. Again, very informal language, which will prejudice the examiner, who has grown up very comfortably. She is a way of showing the other characters the consequences of their actions. Well, that's immediately a method. It's why Priestley has created Daisy. What life is like for the hundreds of others they could affect. And again, this is using Daisy as a symbol to represent hundreds of others. That's a method. We don't live alone. We are responsible for each other. That is a quotation, but it's not an apt one, because it doesn't say that, it doesn't back up the idea that Daisy is a symbol. So it's the wrong quotation to back up the idea, which is why the examiner hasn't highlighted it as an apt one. You don't lose marks for that, but you're not gaining any. Mr. Burling is a directly contrasting character compared with Daisy and Sheila. So this is a method. The examiner's understanding from this that the candidate means Priestley deliberately uses Burling to contrast. It'd be better if you spell that out. His beliefs are set in stone, unwilling to listen to anyone else, and even when he does learn a lesson that he's done something wrong, he likes to put blame on someone else. So this is a bit waffly, because we don't see what the lesson is that he's supposed to have learnt. She hasn't been specific about it, but now she's going to be specific about him blaming other people. You're the one I blame for this. There'll be a public scandal. I was almost certain for a knighthood. He also does not seem affected by the consequences of his actions on others, but only on himself, focusing on the knighthood and the bad publicity. So this is a very well used reference. It is used to show how he blames, but it's also used to back up this idea that he's focusing on himself, just his knighthood. This shows a contrast between the older and the younger characters. How the older and the younger characters are portrayed, as even when Mr. Burling is faced with absolute proof that he must be held responsible for something, he is still so set in his selfish personal views that he will not accept any form of blame. So that has been labelled exploratory, which comes from the top level. And the reason why it's exploratory is the candidate has basically said, on the one hand this, and on the other hand that. So they've got a two-part explanation. This is the sort of thing where your teacher might have said to you, write a lot about a little, which is helpful if you don't know what you're doing, but it's actually not as helpful as saying, have two interpretations that follow on. Yep, so one interpretation is he's faced with absolute proof. The other interpretation is he is still so selfish that he ignores that absolute proof, and then quickly hangs on to any flimsy theory that'll get him off the hook in his own mind. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to be exploratory. It's even better if you have more than one way of interpreting an event or quotation. For example, if we looked at the ending, you could decide that when Sheila doesn't refuse Gerald's ring permanently, one interpretation is that she won't, she's learnt her lesson, but the other interpretation is that given time, once the play is over, She will take that ring back. She will marry Gerald because it's essentially a patriarchy, a sexist society, and the only way that she can gain influence in it is through marriage. So having two different interpretations and then deciding which one you think is best will always be exploratory. Obviously, you can't do that for every point because you haven't got time. And the easiest place to do it is when dealing with the end of the text. And why do I say that? Well, because if you're writing about the writer's ideas, the ending of the text is always where those ideas are crystallized and made most clear. So the ending of the text is always relevant to every single essay that you write ever in your life. So don't forget, write about the ending, link it to the writer's purpose, have more than one interpretation, it will be exploratory. Okay, let's get back to some ideas. Ideas are in gold because gold is the value of them. If you write about the author's ideas, it's so valuable because it shoves you right into the top of the mark range. Let's see what she's written. Mr. Burling also shows how he uses his social power to alienate himself and his family from outside opinions and matters, totally dismissing and ignoring crises just because they are not there to witness it. So the ideas are thinking about social responsibility here, which is Priestley's idea. She hasn't really brought that out fully yet. The way he refers to Daisy as derogatively as possible. He also doesn't like when others question his behaviour. She'd had a lot to say, far too much, she had to go. He tries to ignore and push out others' opinions. I think this hasn't got a mark from the examiner because it's only telling us about Burling and it's not contrasting that to the younger generation, which was in the question. So this candidate needed to show how this is completely different to Sheila or Eric. Right, let's get to the next bit. The inspector is an example of how easily older figures can shape the minds of the younger generation. He educates Eric and Sheila throughout the play and seems to make a lasting impression on both of them. This may be Priestley showing how much potential the younger generation would have if only they were educated about the inequality in the world. So I think this is actually should be gold, this bit, because it is actually about Priestley's ideas. It would have to be coloured twice though, because it's also going to be exploratory. Well, let's see how they explore. Right, they would really have a chance of making some sort of difference and helping those in need, therefore reducing the numbers of Eva Smiths living out there. So very colloquial language again, but it's an exploratory response because it has more than one interpretation. So they're going to make a difference, and that difference is going to reduce the number of Eva Smiths, again connecting to social responsibility again. But it's done weakly. It's not a very clear example of exploring the author's ideas. When we get to the end, you'll see that the examiner comments on only some exploration of ideas in this piece. The inspector is very keen on ideas of social responsibility and community and tries to teach this to the Burlings. His efforts are unfortunately wasted on the older members of the family as they take any opportunity to deflect the blame that he places on them. That is very well written, but it repeats an idea that's already been expressed. This may show how we need to educate more younger people about the injustices in the world. So one of the ways that it's exploratory is it's suggesting that this is for the audience. It's not just the playwright. Priestley wants the audience to think this, which is why we is emphasized. Before they become too isolated from them, apathetic towards others, and only looking out for themselves, as seen in the stubborn nature of Mr. Burling. In conclusion, this play explores the age group in a way that shows the importance of responsibility in two different ways. The responsibility to educate and the responsibility to look out for others. So again, two interpretations which the examiner says is exploratory. So another big hint that if you have more than one way of looking at something, more than one interpretation, you will get into the top band for that part of your essay. The consequences of not being informed of those less fortunate than you and being shielded from all other political ideas is shown in Mr. Burling. He has grown up to be apathetic, selfish, and narrow-minded, which he has unfortunately inflicted on his children. However, as they are young and easily influenced, their minds are much more open to others' ideas and ways of thinking. The inspector calls it his duty to not only report on the consequences of their actions, but make sure they can learn something from it. The idea of being responsible for someone else's welfare also comes up. Eva, who is a representation of how downtrodden certain classes of society, so badly written, it should be of the downtrodden classes of society, shows how quickly and easily a young person's opportunities and entire future can be taken away by the mostly older, wealthier members of society. This is a lesson that the inspector tries to teach Mr. Burling, that sometimes you can't just get a job or work harder. The ones telling you this are the people that often take away any of your chances. So that's a bit vague. Some analysis of the methods. So in that 1,000 words, you can see part of it was waffly, but there are enough examples of quotations, authors' ideas to get the marks. However, what I'd recommend you to do, let me just shrink that. So again, we can see how long it is here, but yeah, what I'd recommend you do is if you write about the author's ideas all the way through, you will also be doing this yellow stuff, the apt ideas, because you'll always be quoting, and you will also be doing the gold stuff all the way through because you'll be writing about the author's ideas all the time. But would you be writing about the methods? Well, of course you would, because every time you looked at the author's idea, you'd have to quote a method to do it. So your essay would have no blank bits, as long as everything in it was aimed at writing about the author's ideas, the author's purpose. And that's why I think that technique is so important. And as I showed you in my last video, it's the ideas that are going to get you the marks. So being conceptualized is writing about the writer's ideas, considering the ideas and context shown through the response, and how character is used by the writer to exemplify ideas. That's what's going to get you the marks. This candidate was marked down because there was only some use of that. So some thoughtful consideration of ideas. There wasn't enough of it. Okay, the final part of the mark scheme is what the examiners call indicative content. What that means is if you have any of these ideas, they indicate that you're getting a really good response. You are allowed any valid interpretation, so you don't have to have these ideas. But if you read these as part of your revision, you will see what it is the examiners are expecting to see. And what you'll find is that is not in AO1. All candidates do really well in Assessment Objective 1 because they're just quoting about the characters. Well, everybody can do that. However, we're interested in the writer's ideas, and they'll be in AO2 and AO3. Let's take a look. So the first bullet point is just about Eric and Sheila's character. The second bullet point is just about Burling's character. But now we get into the ways Priestley uses the characters to explore ideas about responsibility and social change. And so this is a big clue that if you use those keywords, whatever the essay, the play is always going to be about that. And so commit those words to memory, use them in your answer. Any treatment of line statements made by the characters and what this highlights about their attitudes, that again is about character. AO3 The use of Sheila and Eric to explore ideas about social change. There's social change again, and the author's ideas. The use of the Burlings to criticize attitudes towards social responsibility. There it is, social responsibility, and responsibility was there. In other words, when you write about these ideas, you hit both assessment criteria. And AO2 is worth 40% of the marks, and AO3 is worth 20% of the marks. So you're hitting 60% of the marks every time you write about the author's ideas. And in this case, in this play, it's always about social responsibility and social change. Ideas, again, about how the respective generations are used to explore different societal attitudes. So again, this is looking at society, which is the same as social responsibility, which is the same as social change. And any treatment of how the attitudes of the younger generation are used to explore hope for the future. Well, as I said before, every time you consider the end of a text, that always includes the writer's final ideas. And by necessity, any judgment you have about the future is always dependent on how the text ends. So writing about the ending will always get you to do that skill. Okay, well, that was the indicative content for this question, but wouldn't it be cool if that same vocabulary would work on any question? Let's flick down to question 2 and look at the indicative content. So this is the importance of the ending. We're scanning through for the use of the words ideas. Look, there it is. Priestley's ideas. The characters are used to highlight particular ideas. Any treatment of ideas about responsibility. All right, so social change and social responsibility would fit that criteria. Any ideas about guilt and blame? Okay, any comment about guilt and blame is about social change and social responsibility, so it would hit that. Comments on the way the different generation react to the revelation at the end of the play, possibly including the telephone call to be used as the punishment and a vindication of guilt. Again, that's talking about their lack of social responsibility. And any comments on ideas about class consciousness? Well, class consciousness is another way of exploring the ideas of social responsibility and how the upper classes need to look after the welfare of the working classes. And so what we find is focusing on those key ideas of the playwright are going to get you through every essay. And having that key vocabulary will get you through every essay. And finally, if you've still got the energy, let's go to the other specimen paper and see if the same thing happens. So this was a question about Sheila. Okay, and we had to write about, where are we? There we go, social responsibility, the attitudes of the younger generation, social responsibility again, and hope for the future. There that is again. So very strong clues that you must write about social responsibility, whatever the question. The examiners seem obsessed with the idea of the younger generation because they're the generation who are receptive to the inspector's words. So that's always going to come up. And as is this idea of dealing with the ending and the future. Okay, and then finally, this one's about responsibility. And obviously, that's going to have social responsibility going all the way through it. There it is in AO1. There's responsibility again. There's the younger and older generation again. Learn about responsibility again. Contrast between the older and younger generation again. Responsibility and social issues again. Class consciousness again. So there you have it. The key ideas that the examiners want to test you on are in those indicative comments. You know exactly what to write about now. Class consciousness, social responsibility, the ending, and the divide between the older and the younger generations. That's all the examiners are interested in. Incidentally, if you go to my Inspector Calls playlist, you will find a much deeper analysis of an inspector calls than these indicative comments. In other words, my videos will get you beyond 30 marks out of 30. In other words, if you understand the videos and you learn what's in them, you're guaranteed top marks. So go ahead and do it. I'm so excited about this that I'm going to write an Inspector Calls revision guide, because I'm sure I can get students to a much higher level than the essay we've just read that got 27 out of 30. So well done if you've got this far, and don't forget to subscribe if you would like to know more. Goodbye.